All right, you're very welcome along. It's Friday nights off the ball. It's Jerry here with you all the way through until 10. Will is here. Will, how are you?
Good, how you getting on, lads?
Mick is here. Mick, how are you?
Hi, Jer.
If anybody wants to get in touch, you can text the show on 53106. You can tweet us at Off The Ball. A little bit later on in the programme, in this hour, we're going to bring you the crappy quiz. Do not stay tuned for that, whatever you do. Go on, Mick's hands are up. Go on, they're up.
No, I'm just saying,
in anticipation.
look, personally, I think it is worth listening to. I think it was a very good quiz. I think, Jerry, you did a fine job holding it all together because ultimately I did. Look, I actually offered you the opportunity to be a contestant on it. And,
no, thanks.
No, but it would have been fine because all the stupid mistakes I would have recognised because I had written it. And I would have been able to go with it, and then you would have been able to answer beautiful questions. Now, but unfortunately, look, I'll be honest. I normally write the quiz on a Thursday night after work. We finish work at 10 o'clock. I go home. I get home about 11. I start writing the quiz at about 11:30.
Why not last night earlier in the week?
Because I don't have time in my week. I always think I will, and then it never happens. So I generally got very tired last night, and also we did it a little bit later than we normally do, so I got a sense of
it'll be grand.
complacency. Little did I realise that time would be hoovered up, and suffice to say it was a rush job, and there were a couple of mistakes in it, and but none bigger than some of the mistakes that the contestants made, which people will have to wait and find out.
Yeah. I'm intrigued to see if the YouTube commenters turn on you at this stage, Mick, because I was having a quick look at the Slight Tangent reaction.
Oh, okay.
You got the most love this week I've ever seen on the Slight Tangent, and I have a feeling the quiz audience might come back to bite you today.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah, fair enough.
We were going to bring you some of our best stuff between 9 and 10, but between 8 and 9 we're talking about the Limerick hurling team. Our colleague Arthur James O'Dea has written this brilliant book. It's called A Biography in 9 Lives. It's called Limerick, A Biography in 9 Lives. But it also has a chapter on the academy, and so we'll get into that with Arthur. Like the essential story is like unlimited heartbreak, essentially, and this kind of weird, chaotic existence that somebody decided enough was enough, and then they fixed it, and the result is the crop of All Irelands. But it's more a systemic. There's two things to this, right? We can't ignore the fact that an incredibly talented group of young players came through at the same time. They did come through a system which allowed them to hone their skills, and I think maybe that's one of the things that when people think about Dublin, it's like, well, they have all the money, and so therefore it's always going to be like this. But maybe we didn't take full cognizance of the fact that also a really talented group of players who were very driven came through at the same time.
Yeah.
So
you kind of tried to separate the two of them, but you know they are linked. I mean, the Limerick players are a certain type. They're physical specimens. That doesn't come like that. I'm not saying it doesn't come naturally. It does for some of them actually. They're kind of built like that, but they're also trained to be the size and the fitness levels that they display. And they're one of the fittest and most physical teams of all time. They just also happen to have 7, 8, maybe 9 of some of the best hurlers we've seen in a long, long time. And those two things, they meld together into a super team.
So Limerick are more akin to Kilkenny, you would say, in terms of the talent pool that came through. Kilkenny also had Cody, right? And at the same time, they were building this kind of background of like getting players through and having a pathway, and part of that pathway was because St. Kieran's was so amazing that there was already this kind of incredible, like the school system for Leinster rugby exists in Kilkenny because you had Kilkenny CBS who were good, but you also had St. Kieran's who were like multi-generational of being great. And so what Limerick did was, and there's a brilliant chapter on it, a bunch of people got together and wrote a document, presented the document, got the 4 hurling boards together, moved everything into UL, trained the under 12s, under 13s, under 14s, under 15s, under 16s, so side by side on a Saturday morning. So there was role models constantly. Got all of the county managers from every age group in the room and said, what does everybody think their jobs are? Who has winning the championship as their main priority this year? And everybody raised their hands. And they were like, well, that's a problem, because winning the championship is literally only John Allen's job. We're going to judge success and failure on him winning the championship. It's everybody else's job to create players for him and for the senior team. And a penny dropped, and they got funding, and the rest is history, as they say. Now, Arthur will tell this story much better than I've just done, but that's the potted history. The Dubs did something similar. There was like there was an outcry when they were like, oh, we're going to win All Ireland every 3 years because we're going to get our structures in place.
The Blue Wave document.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It was like, look at this, they're chaos. Who do they think they are? Well, who's laughing now? But it's like, obviously Dublin have more advantages than Limerick do in terms of their ability to raise extra funding and to funnel the population through. But equally, it does seem as if that Dublin team had some generationally gifted footballers who came through at the same time, because that pipeline of young talent has not continued. It didn't continue in Kilkenny. So I would suggest that the thing in Limerick is probably more than likely cyclical, but the players who come through will have the benefit of a good pathway, and so they'll never disappear.
Yeah,
but they might not reach this level again.
Well, that's actually, I think that is always the point, and it's I think it's important to realise that when you're having the funding conversation and you're having conversations, particularly about Dublin, right, about unfairness, okay, and there'll be texters in immediately from Dublin saying, you've just talked about Limerick's, setup, and you're not mentioning JP, and there's private funding that comes into different counties, it's in different levels, but we know that there is a fundamental per GEA player discrepancy between the amount of GEA funding that has gone into Dublin versus what has gone into any other county, and it's by a huge, huge number, right? And that's a fact, okay? There is the conversation about that being an unfair advantage outside of population and Croke Park and everything else, right, is never about Dublin never winning or never not winning another All-Ireland. And it always frustrates me that every time they lose a semi-final, we get a conversation that goes, split Tyrone in two, and all the usual.
You're the first person who ever said that.
All the usual, and sometimes it is as glib as that, and then sometimes it's like, consider thoughts going. You fail, as you were mentioning, to appreciate that we've had one of the best groups of footballers of all time, and that this won't go on forever. And all the talk about Dublin unfairness has been hugely unfair on them. I always think the point is that Dublin will never be far away again. And that is the thing. They are an automatic contender. They are automatically in the top four because of their structural advantages. When they didn't have their house in order, that wasn't the case.
No, it's
but
true.
Maybe it should have been.
Well, it should have been the case, right? And then they did get their house in order, and so they're never going to go away again. And I would anticipate that they will be like in the top two, even as opposed to the top four, largely forever on that basis. But it does take really brilliant people to organise an amateur organisation and to inspire people to dedicate their entire life in the pursuit of this, and that comes across in the book as well. Like, so Ger Hegarty's talking about his son. He's like, I wouldn't do this. I just wouldn't do the stuff that he does. There's no way I would be committed. And he was like, you read about like the dedication he had to come back from a cruciate injury in the 90s when it wasn't keyhole surgery. They like literally they open up. I'm picturing flesh and bone as they're like stitching it together with knitting needles, basically back in the 90s.
It was an assumed career ender back then. If you did your ligaments, you were done.
Well, it's post Gaza. So it's around that period of time anyway, and you end up with like giant scars. My point is that he's saying that the level of commitment that this generation have, it's a lifestyle thing, and that's also true as well. But many counties can't inspire that because they don't have the structures in place. So loads of brilliant footballers in other counties are like, why would I make the effort? Which is what the story was in Limerick for basically from the 70s to the team in the 90s and the Tom Ryan team.
The Garrod Hegarty, I was looking at Will because I'm not sure if he's the one who told me, I can't quite remember, but Garrod Hegarty did an interview recently, it might have been with us, where he talked about they went on holidays after the All-Ireland and he was back after a week and just like, God, I need to go to the gym or whatever. Wasn't you who was telling me? And he went in thinking like the place would be deserted, and he said something like 8 or 9 of the team were in there already that day.
I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he was wondering like, when do I take a break away from the training? And he almost felt guilty that he wasn't there and thought, look, I'm going to be the only idiot who walks in. Next thing, most of his mates are already back in training.
Yeah, guilty that he hadn't taken the break.
And look, I think that's a function of the fact that they were probably inducted into that sense. Like that's the role modelling thing. From if you want to achieve at this level, you're going to have to make massive levels of commitment. And that's like that's been in Tyrone football. That Tyrone football have had their house in order, and they never really went away. Right? Like Mickey Hart's team reached All Ireland finals, were like meaningful contenders in every Ulster Championship. You might not have liked watching them play football, right? But they never went away because they had their background systems in place.
And if you go to the Centre of Excellence in Garvey, you literally have to walk by the All-Ireland winning teams to get from where they have breakfast to where they go to the gym. They have set it up in such a way that actually the winning teams are adorning the walls all the way across. Yeah. So you go from the gym, the other winning teams are there on the other side.
And look, here's the thing, right? The walls of Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest had those pictures of that sometimes can be a burden to groups, but actually for whatever reason Tyrone have managed to fix that. I guess my point here is that some counties are really well run, other counties aren't really well run. If you want to be competitive and if you want to have a chance of beating Dublin in football or beating Limerick in hurling, you have to match that organisation, that fundraising, and it's difficult. It's really difficult because they have some population advantage in Limerick. At least there is an urban centre there that's big, but go on.
You just touched on a very good point there. Is like money does start, and fundraising is the starting point, but who you have to actually spend that money. Money is useless if it's spent in the wrong way. I mean, look, I don't mean, like, I'm not being glib about this, but like, look at the health service. People always talk about like how much money we put in. Like, the amount of money isn't the issue in the health service, it's the organisation. And that's the same with various different things in our public services and in every public service around the world. But it's the exact same in any GA. If John Costello wasn't, and everybody working with him wasn't spending the money that Dublin have had right and done this structure in the, like, you know, the Blue Wave paper starting and everything that's happened since, to them now having a centre of excellence in Hollystown Golf Club that was announced this week that's coming up, that's only another thing that Dublin can, you know, match anybody, if not have better than anybody else in the county. They are using the resources that are fed to them and raised by them in the appropriate way, and that's not a guarantee. That's just not a same thing with Limerick, like, you know.
And when it comes to Limerick, I sat down for about an hour with Leo O'Connor last summer. So he was in charge of the Offaly minor hurlers, brought them to the All-Ireland final against Tipperary. He'd been the manager for the minors and 21s with the Limerick bunch, who are now the Limerick senior hurling team. And I asked him...
Is he a Limerick man?
Sorry?
Is he a Limerick man?
He is. I'd ask him what they had changed that actually made things turn for Limerick at the start of the previous decade, because it was around about that time that they made a very focused effort, particularly at underage level, to try and improve things, despite some very good young players coming through. And he said contact time with the players was one of the first things that they improved. So they sat down and basically took a complete check on how many hours the coaches were actually getting with the players, and they advanced that by just a few hours a week at the weekends by organising 2 different sessions where the players who came in with effectively development panels would then be getting about 5 hours of contact coaching as opposed to 2 hours before. And he said that made a massive difference. And the point he was making is that counties don't have to have a huge amount of money. It was mainly volunteers, and it was mainly about putting a really good structure around what they were doing that actually made the difference, as opposed to improving facilities or anything like that. So he was saying that actually that is a huge part of it that sometimes is forgotten as well. It's just the sheer contact that's available for players with coaches who can help to improve them. And then he was pointing out the clubs then had to upskill their coaches to improve the standard of coaching they were getting at the clubs as well.
Grassroots is everything, isn't it? Like, in terms of like GA, you know, it's still so small really, and it's like it just needs that starting point. So like, people will remember that the Clare County Board were under a huge amount of pressure a couple of years ago. There was fights with Brian Lowen and there was, you know, protests against the board and getting to resign and so on. And there was a huge amount of it was over fundraising and the lack of it, really. And Clare Champion have written a number of pieces about the lack of fundraising in the Clare County Board and obstacles to fundraising. And then at the same time all this was happening, Club Clare, a supporters-led organisation, raised incredible funds, and it just gave them as well that sort of say in the situation. And things have been sort of like, with the same people involved, it wasn't the sort of root and branch change that people were calling for. With the same people involved, things are far more organised, and I, without going into details, I don't have them, but people are far more positive about what the Clare County Board are doing in terms of their organisation at the moment than they were even 18 months ago. You know, it can happen quick, but it needs a groundswell to force it to happen, you know?
Yeah, look, I mean, all of this...
Doesn't need it, it helps, sorry.
That, like, it is such... So we're talking as well about the figures for the Irish Independent do this every year. Is that where the figures are coming from the cost of Galway?
Irish Examiners, the Galway one, say its own
okay.
Cormacan story, which is, like, it's a remarkable jump in the costs of their 2 teams. Now, of course, their hurlers got to an All-Ireland semi-final and their footballers got to the All-Ireland final, so naturally that meant they went a bit longer than the year before. But if you compare to the figure for last season, which was just over $1 million, 1.17, it swelled to 2.16 million for the year just gone by for the Galway senior football and hurling panels. So it is a remarkable Cold War that we're involved in with the cost for teams, and we were wondering if this might come down
arms race
with the split season in this arms race too, because of the fact that, you know, technically you should need fewer sessions because the season should be over earlier for everybody, but still you're looking at a remarkable figure, and it will be very interesting. The Independent, as you mentioned, I think usually it's Colin Keyes who does it. He does a table at the end of the season for the figures that can be obtained, because it can be very difficult when you go into county board accounts to actually work out what is team development training, because you could just put up much wider figures. But it is interesting to see that creeping over 2 million for a county now. This
is definitely the type of thing that should be standardised. There should be a report at the end of the year that the GAA centrally forces all the counties to publish, because this is competitive advantage, how much you can spend. Like we see it in all other sports, the more you can spend on your elite team, the better it is. So, and it's really interesting. Galway have broken the 2 million figure. Owen says it's the first time that any county has done that, but they still recorded a surplus. So that's like, they obviously have their house in order. They're going really well. They have a management team in both hurling and football that is allowing them to dream big and to reach fairly heady heights. Very interesting to see how well they managed to maintain that. But like,
and like I remember when Paul Belly was on OTB AM with you guys last year, and that was ahead of the Galway convention where he was elected as the full chairman, having been the hurling chairman before. And that was one of the things he had pledged, was like, Galway were going to raise the funds in order to put everything in place for the two teams. And there's a strong argument he had. If the county board is bringing money in, getting the best county teams you possibly can is a good way to spend it.
And is there any argument that that's not the best way to spend money?
I don't know. I don't, like,
2 million on a senior county team.
Where did it go on? Two
on
teams.
Both teams, okay.
Yeah.
Who both, obviously are very, very
Deep in the
competitive,
season,
and that's not the case in most counties. I understand that.
Like, I know that there are going to be people saying it's an amateur organisation, but like if this just means that players are getting good quality care, and this is the cost of the good quality care to produce. Is it 8 million ticket revenue? Is it 16 million ticket revenue per game for the All-Ireland finals? Like, massive amounts of money are slushing through the system. We need to make sure that it's all looked after. A good old-fashioned audit of where the money's going in each of these counties. That's what I'm saying. At the end of the year, every county's held accountable and it's all published and everybody knows where it's going, so you can see what's going on.
And I think it should be transparent, Ger, when you consider that the money comes from the GA centrally back down to these counties, which ultimately some of it finds its way from the taxpayer into the pot that finds its way back down to the GAA. You could argue that there should be transparency about this. And maybe if there was transparency, some of the counties wouldn't be getting themselves into a position where, like Galway obviously have got big population, great tradition, two big teams, therefore they're going to spend money on trying to be successful. But if you're a team further down the ladder, do you feel then that you need to be spending $1 million a year per team in order to compete?
Perhaps, right? And if that's the case, then those funds need to be allocated centrally. Like what's acceptable? This could lead to a spending cap where everybody gets. You get 2 nutritionists, you get 3 physiotherapists.
Yeah,
that's what, and that's all you're allowed. You're not allowed to spend any more money than that because that's too much. I'm not. That's quite an extreme example. It's too nuts and bolts. But there's definitely a way to make this more competitively equal. And as you say, a lot of this money is coming centrally. All the money goes back. 80% of the money raised by ticket sales and media rights is supposed to go back to the. Is it 90%? Well, I can't remember off the top of my head. So maybe somebody has the exact figure. But a massive amount of the money is supposed to go back to grassroots. And I think the money question inevitably is Dublin bad, Limerick bad, not fair, too much, and actually other counties are able to get their house in order, and it's a much more nuanced conversation.
Yes.
Which maybe we've had or maybe we haven't.
And it's nuanced in loads of ways. So it's like it's nuanced in exactly as you were saying there, and it's also nuanced in how much credit we give to golden generations versus organisation and perceived unfairness and so on.
Yeah, you didn't talk about Oisin Mullin finally being confirmed. This was one of those rumours that did the rounds last weekend. It was coupled up with the Lee Keegan rumour. Lee Keegan has not confirmed as of this moment that we're recording this.
I would have thought, was he on Alan Brogan's podcast this week, I think it was, he basically
said he hasn't made his mind up.
He indicated that he's very much thinking about it, and I almost got the feeling that he was going to stay based on that.
Yeah, it's hard to know. We've been, like, he brings it up unprompted anytime he's on, and I'm going to see how the season goes. And the season went pretty well. Like, still one of the best footballers, definitely in Mayo.
Oh, for him, I was thinking for Mayo, yeah. No, Lee Keegan is certainly worth his place, but you always have to think about going back to it now.
Yeah, it's
in November.
It's a short out season. The All-Ireland will be over by the start of August.
Well, he's only just finished playing because Westport just lost in the college championship. Like, I mean, it's non-stop. Like,
you are definitely saying to him, come back in February. Like, we'll put you on we're not putting you out in the muck and bullets of any of the games in the league. We're going to have you ready to go for the championship. Not for the first one, maybe for the second one, and starting the third championship game. And we're going to win All Ireland. That's why you're coming back.
Yeah, the DJ minutes. Coming back for, why not?
Just on Oisin Mullin, very interesting point raised by Maurice Brosnan about coincidences here, where Henley's stag do was in Dingle on October the 8th. Geelong were in the same pub when Oisin Mullin arrived.
Oh, no.
Because they had gone down to watch the Kerry Championship game that Mark O'Connor had been given permission
Oh,
by Geelong
wow.
to play.
Oh, no.
So half the panel were there. I think they spent the afternoon in Portlaoise.
And they were like, come on, it's great. Look what we
Kerry.
get to do.
Oh, look who it is. It's this guy who's still listed on our website as a signing from last season. So Geelong never actually removed him from the squad list from having agreed to move there last year, even when he went back to play for Mayo. So that would indicate to me as well that Geelong have had a very long-term interest in signing him as an international rookie, that they were willing to not use up that slot and then convince him to go to Australia this time round. I think they're getting a terrific player, but the fact that their Irish signings have gone so well, Tui has signed a 1-year extension now after they won the Premiership. O'Connor's been playing really, really well, and a sweetener that Tui got as part of the deal, he gets exactly what Mark O'Connor got this time round. He's been promised he can play for Portlaoise in the Championship next year. He had intended to play this year, but they got knocked out in the semi-final. If they'd won, Zach Tui would have probably been playing for Portlaoise in the Leinster Championship the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
Which was a change of position from Geelong. They didn't let him play before.
Right.
I'd say Rob Henley had a good time. Dingle's a good place for a stag.
Yeah.
Very good.
And that's the important takeaway here from sliding doors one. But obviously,
Don't try and put a hat on that big penguin outside the aquarium, lest the Gardaí roll up.
Oh, and what did they say to you?
Will ye go away home?
And you were like,
And they were very right.
yes, Gareth. Sorry, Gareth.
I was a bit more surprised that McKenna took a second bite at the AFL cherry, because I thought when he'd come back to Tyrone that his intention was to be back in Ireland longer term. Now his feeling is he's gone across now to try and win a premiership this time round, so maybe his mentality is slightly different going back to Australia. But I was a bit more surprised about him going than Oisin Mullin. I got the feeling that Mullin was coming back, give Mayo another year, see where I'm at, and probably go back over. But
Well, Conor McKenna's already made it. Like he's not going back to try and fight it out to get his place in the team, whereas Oisin Mullin is starting at the very bottom of the totem pole, even though they kept the space open for him. That's an easy thing to do, right? As far as I'm very unfamiliar with how the AFL works, but as far as I know, like keeping the open space, grant somebody else could have taken that open space, but it does not count against any of your picks or any of the salary cap, I don't even think.
no, I think he comes in outside the salary cap because he's a Category B rookie, I'm going to say. I'd have to check their press release
Category
again.
B, yeah.
Yeah. So effectively they're free hits, which is
What
why
does it
the
mean
Irish
for
player is
Mayo?
so attractive.
How big a blow is this for Mayo?
It's not ideal. Like Oisin Mullin is, we're talking about Lee Keegan going back and all. Like the most important thing for Mayo is regeneration, and to be able to have these 5-6 new leaders of the team established by the time that Lee Keegan and Aidan O'Shea and all these boys aren't there anymore. And we've talked about it last year. The amount of, there was 6, I think, players. I don't have it off the top of my head. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I think it was 6 players that played in the semi-final. When did Mayo get knocked out? Quarter-final last year? That had played in the 2011 breakthrough game. That's a huge amount. You know what I mean? And Mullin was one of the leaders of this new breed who were going to take over from them and ensure that Mayo didn't slip. And that's a big loss because there's only 2 or 3 of them. But I think the one thing we've learned about Mayo in the last few years, though, is that someone will almost come to take their place. You kind of feel like they just have this ability to stay at that top level. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I presume it's all part of the structure, but I wouldn't be happy if I was from Mayo right now.
I think it's a big blow. Like, he's one of the leaders of their defence. I mean, he's obviously shown his ability through underage and through to his first couple of years now at senior level. He's like a remarkably good footballer, so I think it's a huge, huge blow.
Yeah, all right. Not to rub it in on Mayo, but this some Mayo stuff might come on a little bit later in the. I've just realised now. Oh no, sorry. It's not the best news for Mayo football. All right, anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this section of the show up? And I just warn you about listening to the crappy quiz. It's at your own peril.
It's not that bad. It's pretty bad. No, just well done, Iran, I suppose. That's quite a way to respond to losing 6-2, isn't it?
Yeah. This the weekend of the World Cup, the games, they're going to be pretty good. The teams who lose, the high-profile teams who lose their first game, suddenly it's not quite knockout, but it basically is. Okay, you can draw and not get knocked out, but you kind of need to win.
It was 2 good groups for those shocks to happen in. Because if you look now, it's like suddenly Argentina and Germany are in perilous positions, and then they come up on Saturday and Sunday night respectively against Mexico, who I don't think are what they were, but at the same time I'd rather not have to face Mexico in a must-win after losing to Saudi Arabia, and for Germany, Spain. Like, can Germany survive with a point against Spain? I don't know, because I think Japan are going to beat Saudi Arabia. Germany are going to have to win.
Costa Rica, you mean?
So yeah, Costa Rica.
Yeah,
My group mixed up. But either way, I actually think I think Japan are going to beat Costa Rica, which will mean that, you know, if Germany don't win, they could be gone.
Goes from 2 games, Ger, that we probably considered were going to decide first and second place within the groups, to 2 teams in genuine peril on a difficult side of the draw. If Argentina recover, it's not the end of the world. It might actually help them to finish second in that group, bizarrely enough, because of Brazil and France being over on that side of the draw. But at the same time, you would have thought that Argentina were going to breeze through what seemed a very easy group on paper. Now, the 2 teams who played, we were chatting to Marcella the other night in the football show about this, I thought Poland and Mexico both looked pretty poor in the other game, that Argentina should be able to beat both of them. But it's amazing how the pressure will mount on them.
The only thing is, I'd say form doesn't form from one game to another. It's a World Cup. Random stuff happens. Teams suddenly get hot. There's a fight in the dressing room. Loads of stuff, like Iran being a good example. So I'm not ready to write anybody who played badly in a 0-0 draw in the first game just yet.
No. And like with Germany, do you consider Spain based on how well they played against a Costa Rica team who looked awful? Yeah. Or are Spain ready to actually go and dump the Germans out? It's a huge incentive for Spain to go out and beat them.
It is. It really is. It really is. And they've got a team who could absolutely blossom, or that might have been the peak for the kids. They might be like, this is really easy, and then they completely underestimate.
They're still carrying 1 or 2 Spain. Like, you know, we're getting to world, like.
But it's a World Cup. You can carry a couple. Yeah. That's it. Right.
Did enjoy, by the way, just on this, because I bigged up Luis Enrique on Twitch because I thought it was going to be good fun before the tournament started. Did you see his quote from last night's?
I saw the quote. Was it real? I didn't verify a second source on that.
Apparently it is, but it was him being slightly funny, where he said, are the players allowed to have sex before games? He said, it's not ideal, and if they were to find themselves in an orgy, well, sure, look, that's life.
I mean, obviously, he's had a different life from some of us. Right, it's Friday night. We're going to take a quick break. We're back with the crappy quiz.